Foot alien queen mocked the idea of a human mate, until a miracle pregnancy shook the galaxy. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story is titled, Foot alien queen mocked the idea of a human mate, until a miracle pregnancy shook the galaxy. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's jump into today's incredible tale. Imagine a world where humans are still considered insignificant by some of the most powerful alien species. But what happens when a powerful alien queen mocks the idea of a human mate, only to have her world turned upside down in the most unimaginable way? Let's find out. Commander Will Watson stood in the bitter cold, his breath fogging up the visor of his helmet as he gazed at the alien landscape. The wind howled across the barren snowfields, biting at his exposed skin. His shuttle had crashed here, on this desolate world, and now he was alone in the freezing wilderness, a human in a strange land that didn't seem to care if he lived or died. The cold cut through his black combat armor like 1,000 knives. He had made a desperate call for help, but the only answer he received was the eerie silence of the empty frequencies. This was supposed to be a routine mission. They had been mapping the sector when the anomaly appeared on their scanners. The world was uncharted, but the energy signature was too strong to ignore. And now, here he was, stuck in a world that didn't care about him, with nothing but his wits and the limited resources he could scavenge from the wreckage of his shuttle. Will knew he had to find shelter, or the planet would claim him as its next victim. As he trudged through the snow, he kept his weapon ready, eyes scanning for any sign of danger. And then he saw her. She was standing in the distance, tall and imposing, her skin glowing orange in the harsh light of the setting sun. At first, he thought she was a mirage, but as he moved closer, the details became clearer. She was a queen, a massive alien who towered over him by nearly a foot. Her armor was made of overlapping orange scales that shimmered like molten metal, and her eyes, golden and piercing, locked onto his with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "You, human," she spoke, her voice rich and deep, like a melody. "What are you doing here?" Will didn't flinch, keeping his posture straight. "I'm just trying to survive, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his insides. "I didn't come here to cause trouble. I just need shelter." The alien queen's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't a friendly one. "You think you can survive here, in my domain?" she asked, her tone mocking. "Do you have any idea how foolish your species is?" Will's hand tightened around the grip of his weapon. He wasn't sure what kind of danger she posed, but he knew better than to show fear. "I'm just trying to make it through the storm. If you're willing to help, I can promise you I'm no threat." The queen laughed, the sound echoing through the icy wind. "A human, asking for help. How quaint. Do you think I would offer assistance to one of your kind?" Her eyes narrowed as she surveyed him, seemingly sizing him up like an insect. "You are nothing but a fleeting speck in the galaxy, a species that is still struggling to make its mark. You are weak, pathetic, and beneath me." Will held her gaze, refusing to back down. "Maybe so, but that doesn't mean I deserve to freeze to death out here." She tilted her head slightly, her expression shifting. "You are bold. I'll give you that." Her voice softened for just a moment. "Very well. Come with me. You may stay in my outpost, but know this. I do not do this out of kindness. It is simply because you amuse me." Will nodded, his eyes wary. He didn't trust her, but he didn't have much of a choice. She turned and began walking away, her armor clinking with each step. Will followed, his thoughts racing. He couldn't afford to anger her, not when his survival depended on her mercy. As they walked through the storm, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something about her had changed, and he wasn't sure if it was the storm or something else entirely. For now, all he could do was follow and hope for the best. As they made their way through the howling storm, Will kept a careful distance behind the alien queen. Her towering form, her scales shimmering in the faint light of the alien moon, cut a striking silhouette against the swirling white snow. The storm was getting worse, the wind biting through his armor, and the cold seeping into his bones. Despite her earlier arrogance, Will couldn't help but feel a strange sense of gratitude. She hadn't left him to die, even though she clearly thought little of his kind. They walked in silence, the crunch of the snow beneath their boots the only sound amidst the storm. The alien queen's movements were graceful and effortless, despite the harsh conditions. Will could see the faintest hint of discomfort in her posture, but she hid it well. "We're almost there," she said after a long pause, her voice cutting through the wind like a blade. Will nodded, his mind racing. He had to keep his wits about him. Being in the presence of such a powerful being, who had no qualms about killing him if it suited her, wasn't a position he could afford to take lightly. Soon, they reached the shelter, a large structure carved into the side of a jagged mountain. It was a far cry from anything human-made, but it offered a reprieve from the biting cold. The door opened automatically as they approached, and the queen stepped inside, motioning for Will to follow. The interior was surprisingly warm, a stark contrast to the freezing world outside. Will took a deep breath, the warmth hitting him like a wave, and he finally allowed himself a moment of relief. The queen led him through the large, dimly lit halls, her boots echoing in the silence. "You may stay here for the night," she said, her voice cold and distant once again. "But do not mistake my generosity for weakness, human. You are here as a prisoner, and you will be treated as such." Will nodded, keeping his thoughts to himself. He knew better than to challenge her now, not when he was at her mercy. She led him to a small room, furnished simply with a cot and a few basic supplies. The walls were made of a strange, alien material that seemed to shimmer in the low light. The queen paused at the door, her golden eyes locking onto his. "Do not attempt to escape," she warned, her tone filled with quiet menace. "I will not hesitate to kill you if you do." Will met her gaze without flinching. "I won't try to escape, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. "I'm just trying to survive." The queen studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if searching for any sign of deceit. Finally, she gave a curt nod and turned to leave. "Rest," she said simply, before disappearing down the hallway. Will stood in the room for a moment, his mind racing. He was alive, at least for now. That was something to be thankful for. But what would tomorrow bring? He had no way of knowing how long the queen would keep him here or what her true intentions were. He glanced around the room, noting the few supplies scattered around, enough to keep him alive for a while, but not much more. He couldn't afford to relax, not for a second. He had to keep his guard up, stay alert. Will lay down on the cot, pulling the blanket over himself. The warmth from the shelter was a welcome relief, but it couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at him. The queen, the situation, everything about this felt wrong. But for now, there was nothing he could do except wait and hope that he could find a way out of this alive. Outside, the storm raged on, its fury an ever-present reminder of the danger that still lurked on this alien world. The next morning, Will woke to the sounds of the storm still howling outside the shelter. The warmth inside the room was a welcome relief, but it did little to calm the unease that had settled in his chest. He had spent the night thinking, analyzing every word, every movement of the alien queen. She was powerful, intelligent, and clearly not to be underestimated. Her initial mocking attitude toward him, however, had left him wondering, was it a defense mechanism or something deeper? The door opened, and the queen stepped inside, her presence commanding the room. She was wearing her battle armor again, the overlapping orange scales reflecting the soft glow of the shelter's lights. "Get up, human," she said, her voice carrying a hint of impatience. Will sat up on the cot, rubbing his face as he tried to shake off the remnants of sleep. "Yes, Your Majesty," he replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "You'll follow me today," the queen continued, turning to walk out of the room. "We have matters to discuss." Will got to his feet, grabbing his jacket and following her into the hallway. The warmth of the shelter seemed to fade the farther they walked, as the temperature dropped once again, a stark reminder of the world outside. They arrived in a large central chamber, where a table covered in maps and alien devices lay in the center. The queen moved to the table, placing a hand on one of the devices, which immediately lit up, displaying a holographic image of the surrounding terrain. "This is the only route to the nearest settlement," she said, her voice colder than before. "We'll need to travel through hostile territory to get there. I'll allow you to assist in the journey, but make no mistake, your life is still in my hands." Will nodded, trying to mask the tension he felt. He had to stay calm, keep his wits about him. This was no longer just about survival. He was trapped in a political game between alien powers, and he had no idea how it would play out. The Queen's eyes flicked to him, her gaze piercing as if she were reading his thoughts. "You still doubt my words, human," she said, the hint of amusement returning to her voice. "I can see it in your eyes. You think you can outsmart me, escape this situation." Will didn't flinch. "No, Your Majesty. I'm just trying to understand where I stand." The Queen's lips curled into a smile, though it was far from friendly. "You stand at my mercy, human. That is your place." She paused, studying him. "But perhaps I've misjudged you. You're not as foolish as I thought." Will didn't know whether to take that as a compliment or a warning. He had learned not to trust her words too easily. "You're welcome to judge me however you like," he said, keeping his voice steady. "But I'll need more than your mercy if I'm to make it out of here alive." The Queen stared at him for a long moment, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. "You have spirit, human," she said, her voice softer now, though still filled with authority. "I'm not sure if that's a blessing or a curse, but it will serve you well. For now, you will be my guide through the terrain. We leave immediately." Will nodded, his mind racing. He had no idea what to expect from this journey, but one thing was clear: he was no longer just a prisoner. His survival now depended on his ability to navigate not only the harsh landscape, but also the unpredictable emotions and motives of the alien Queen. The storm outside had not abated, and the wind howled louder as they made their way out of the shelter, stepping into the freezing wasteland once more. The Queen led the way, her powerful figure cutting through the storm with ease. Will followed closely behind, his thoughts racing. The storm was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. Would he find a way to survive this alien world? And what, if anything, would the Queen's unexpected change of heart mean for him? He had no answers yet, but he was determined to find out. As they trekked through the fierce storm, Will kept his distance, his eyes constantly scanning the alien landscape for any signs of danger. The Queen led the way, her pace unhurried, as if she were unaffected by the blizzard. Will, on the other hand, could feel the cold biting into his bones, despite the thick layers of his combat gear. The snow seemed to whip around them in every direction, but the Queen moved with an eerie confidence, her golden eyes focused ahead. She hadn't spoken a word since their departure from the shelter, and Will wasn't sure if that was a good or bad sign. Was she plotting something? Or was she simply deep in thought? Either way, he had learned to stay alert in her presence. The longer they walked, the more Will began to notice the oddities of this alien world. The landscape, while desolate, was unlike anything he had seen on Earth. The snow-covered ground seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, broken only by jagged rock formations and the occasional twisted plant that looked more like a weapon than anything living. Even the air felt different, thin and frigid, with a smell of metal and ozone lingering in every breath. It was a world on the edge of existence, a place that seemed to thrive on harshness. Will's mind began to wander as they walked, the quiet between him and the Queen both unsettling and peaceful. His thoughts turned to Earth, to the family he'd left behind, and to the mission that had gone so wrong. He had been trained for danger, for survival, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Nothing could have prepared him for the alien Queen who had been his captor, yet, over the course of their journey, had slowly become something else in his eyes. Despite the cold, despite her intimidating presence, there was something strangely captivating about her. Her beauty, though alien, was undeniable. But it wasn't just her physical appearance, it was her strength, her control over everything around her. She was a ruler, a conqueror, and Will found himself wondering, despite everything, what it would be like to be in her favor. A sudden crackling sound interrupted his thoughts, and Will's eyes shot up to see the Queen pausing in front of him, her golden eyes narrowing. "Stay close," she commanded, her voice carrying a sharp edge. Will didn't need to be told twice. He moved swiftly to stand beside her, his senses on high alert. The storm seemed to die down for a moment, and in the eerie silence, Will could hear the faintest sound, a low growl, like something large and dangerous was lurking nearby. He could see the Queen's posture shift, her muscles tensing, as if she were ready for whatever threat was approaching. Will reached for his weapon, his hand shaking slightly from the cold, but he knew better than to question the queen's instincts. She had been in these conditions longer than he had, and he wasn't about to doubt her now. Just as quickly as the moment of tension had arrived, the growl faded into the distance, leaving only the howling wind in its wake. The queen relaxed, but her eyes remained alert, scanning the horizon. "We need to keep moving," she said, her voice a low, commanding tone. Will nodded, relieved that whatever danger had been near had passed for now, but knowing that the storm could be hiding worse threats. As they continued forward, Will couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. The queen, who had once dismissed him as nothing more than a nuisance, was now treating him with a strange, unspoken respect. There were no words between them as they walked, but in the way she moved and in the way she glanced at him, Will could tell she was starting to see him differently. Perhaps, in some way, he had earned her respect, though he still wasn't sure how or why. What was becoming clear, however, was that this journey wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something more. The longer they spent together in the harshness of this alien world, the more Will began to understand the queen's world, her rules, and maybe even her motivations. Was it possible that they could find some kind of alliance, some understanding between them? The thought lingered in his mind, but it was too dangerous to dwell on. For now, he had to survive, and that meant following the queen's lead. Hours passed, and the storm began to lighten. The landscape before them opened up to reveal a strange, massive structure in the distance. The queen stopped in her tracks, her golden eyes locking onto the building with an intensity that made Will feel like he had stumbled onto something important. "There," she said, her voice suddenly softer, almost reverent. "That is where we will find answers." Will followed her gaze, his curiosity piqued. What answers? What was so significant about this place? He didn't know yet, but he was about to find out. The journey had only just begun. As Will followed the queen toward the massive structure, his heart began to race with anticipation. The building ahead was unlike anything he had seen before, its architecture both ancient and otherworldly. Tall spires rose from the ground like jagged teeth, and the surface of the structure shimmered as if made of living stone, constantly shifting and changing. It was a place that seemed to hum with energy, an unspoken power radiating from it that made Will's skin prickle. The queen moved ahead with purpose, her footsteps sure and steady despite the growing tension in the air. Will had no idea what awaited them inside, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it would change everything. As they approached the entrance, the doors seemed to react to their presence. With a soft hiss, they slid open, revealing a vast interior bathed in dim, pulsating light. The air inside was thick, almost electric, and Will could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. The queen stepped inside first, her presence commanding the space as she moved forward. Will hesitated for a moment, taking in the strange symbols that adorned the walls, the alien technology that hummed softly in the background. It was a place of great significance, and Will couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to uncover something monumental. "This is the heart of my empire," the queen said, her voice echoing through the chamber as she turned to face him. "This is where the true power lies." Will watched her closely, his curiosity growing with every word. The queen had always been a mystery, a powerful and enigmatic figure whose motives he had yet to fully understand. But something in her voice, the way she spoke now, told him that she wasn't just a ruler. She was a survivor, someone who had fought for everything she had. "What is this place?" Will asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The queen's eyes flicked to him, her golden gaze sharp and calculating. "It's a temple, of sorts," she replied, her voice cold, yet with an undercurrent of reverence. "A place of ancient knowledge and power, long forgotten by most of my people. But it still holds the answers we seek." Will furrowed his brow, trying to make sense of her words. "What answers?" he asked. The queen turned away, walking deeper into the chamber. "The galaxy is changing, human," she said, her tone low and steady. "Our empire is faltering. Our people have lost their way. But here, we can find the key to our survival." Will's mind raced as he followed her. What could this place hold that was so important? What could the queen possibly want with him in this ancient, mysterious place? As they moved deeper into the heart of the temple, the air seemed to grow heavier, the hum of energy growing louder. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes of battles, of ancient rulers, and strange, otherworldly creatures. Some of the images were familiar, others completely alien. Will couldn't make sense of it all, but he knew one thing for sure. This was no ordinary structure. This was a place of great significance, and whatever secrets it held, they would change the course of everything. The queen stopped in front of a large pedestal at the center of the chamber, her hand outstretched toward it. The pedestal was made of a strange material, its surface smooth and black, with glowing symbols etched into it. The queen's fingers hovered over the surface for a moment before she spoke again. "This is the key," she said, her voice filled with determination. "This is what will save my people, and perhaps your own." Will stepped forward, his eyes locked on the pedestal. "What is it?" he asked. The queen turned to face him, her expression more serious than he had ever seen. "It's an artifact," she said, "a relic of a time long past. But its power is immense, and it is the key to unlocking the future of both our worlds." Will stared at her, his mind racing. The weight of her words hung in the air, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him. He had no idea what this artifact was, but it was clear that it held immense power. And whatever it was, the queen believed it was the answer to their survival. As he looked at the pedestal, Will couldn't help but wonder, what price would they have to pay for the power it offered? And was he ready to face the consequences of unleashing it? The queen stepped back from the pedestal, her gaze still fixed on it. "We will begin the process soon," she said. "But you must understand, human, this will change everything. The balance of power in the galaxy will shift, and there will be no turning back." Will nodded, a sense of resolve settling over him. He had no choice but to follow her, to see this through. Whatever lay ahead, he was in this now, for better or worse. The queen's eyes met his once more, a flicker of something unreadable in them. "Are you ready for what's to come?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with a strange intensity. Will took a deep breath, his answer already clear in his mind. "I'm ready." As Will stood there, staring at the pedestal, the weight of the queen's words hung heavily in the air. The artifact in front of him seemed to pulse with an energy he could almost feel, vibrating in the depths of his bones. Whatever this relic was, it was unlike anything he had ever encountered, its power almost tangible. The queen, standing beside him, was equally mesmerized, her golden eyes reflecting the eerie light of the glowing symbols etched into the pedestal. She had spoken of this artifact as if it were their salvation, the key to survival for both their worlds, but Will couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. "What happens now?" Will asked, his voice low, but steady. The queen glanced at him, her lips curling into a faint smile, though it lacked warmth. "Now, we begin the process," she replied, her voice carrying an edge of finality. "But first, we must activate it. The mechanism is old, forgotten by most of my people, but I know the ritual." She stepped forward, her hand reaching out to the pedestal, her fingers brushing lightly over the glowing symbols. As her touch made contact, the pedestal emitted a low hum, and the symbols flared brightly for a moment before settling back into their steady glow. Will felt a shiver run down his spine. It was as if the very air around them had changed. The queen moved back, giving him space. "It will take time," she said, her voice now carrying a tone of reverence. "But we must be patient. This artifact will not reveal its power instantly." Will nodded, though his mind raced with questions. How would this artifact change the galaxy? How would it affect him? And why had the queen brought him here? He had no answers, but he knew one thing for certain. His survival, and perhaps the survival of his species, was now tied to whatever came next. As they waited, the queen's demeanor shifted, becoming more introspective. She turned to Will, her eyes meeting his. "You have proven yourself more useful than I anticipated," she said, her voice soft but filled with a strange intensity. Will blinked, caught off guard by her words. "I'm just trying to survive," he replied, his tone cautious. The queen regarded him for a long moment, her gaze unwavering. "You're not like the others," she said, her voice thoughtful. "Most humans are weak, easily intimidated by power, but you stand your ground. You make me wonder if your kind might not be as insignificant as I once thought." Will felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort at her words. She was the ruler of an empire, a being whose very presence commanded respect, and yet here she was, acknowledging him in a way that felt personal. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. Before he could respond, the pedestal in front of them began to hum louder, and the symbols on its surface shifted. Will took a step back, his heart racing. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice tense. The queen watched intently, her expression unreadable. "It's starting," she said softly. "The activation is working." The pedestal's hum intensified, the symbols glowing brighter, then dimming, as though the relic itself was awakening after a long slumber. Will felt a surge of energy in the air, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to vibrate. The queen stepped closer, her hand reaching out to steady herself on the pedestal. She closed her eyes, focusing intently on whatever was happening before them. Will, unable to resist, stepped closer as well, his curiosity overpowering his fear. "What is this?" he asked again, his voice barely a whisper. The queen opened her eyes, her gaze locking onto his. "This is the beginning," she said, her voice almost reverent. "The beginning of a new era. The artifact will change everything. It will give us the power to reshape the galaxy, to restore our empire, and to give humanity a place in the stars." Will felt a chill run through him at her words. She had spoken of salvation, of survival, but the more he learned, the more he realized that this wasn't just about survival. The queen was looking for something far more dangerous: control. The pedestal before them began to glow even brighter, the energy in the room building, surging with power. Will could feel it now, a strange, overwhelming force pulling at him, as though the relic was reaching out to him. "Is this really what you want?" Will asked, his voice steady despite the unease building inside him. The queen turned to him, her golden eyes glowing with an intensity he had never seen before. "It is what we all need," she replied, her tone unwavering. "The galaxy is changing. It always has. But now, it is our turn to shape it. And you, human, are the key to making that happen." Will felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known that his survival depended on this queen, but now it seemed like much more was at stake. The power in the room was growing, and Will realized with a sinking feeling that there was no going back. Whatever happened next, it would change the galaxy, and it would change him. The hum of the pedestal reached a crescendo, and Will's heart pounded in his chest as the air crackled with raw energy. The queen stepped forward, her eyes locked on the relic, her hand still resting on the pedestal as the power of the artifact surged into her. Will could only watch, knowing that the moment of truth had arrived. The energy in the room intensified, filling the air with a crackling hum that reverberated through Will's chest. He could feel it, a power unlike anything he had ever experienced, and as the queen's hand pressed against the pedestal, the room seemed to bend and shift around them, as if the very walls were alive. Will took a step back, unable to take his eyes off the artifact, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. What had he gotten himself into? What did this power truly mean? And what was it that the queen was about to unleash? The queen's golden eyes glowed with an intensity that sent a chill down Will's spine, her entire body tense as she absorbed the energy from the pedestal. She stood there, motionless, as if she were becoming one with the artifact, her breath steady, but her expression fierce with concentration. Will watched, feeling as though time itself had slowed. He had no idea what the artifact was capable of, but he knew one thing for certain. It was no ordinary relic. This was a weapon, a tool of unimaginable power, and the queen intended to wield it. He could see the slight tremor in her hands, her fingers trembling just slightly as the energy built, her connection to the artifact deepening. For a moment, Will wondered if she was truly in control, or if the power she was unlocking was slowly consuming her. "You don't understand, do you?" The queen's voice was soft, but it carried an underlying power, like a storm on the verge of breaking. "This isn't just about survival. It's about domination. Control. This artifact will give me everything I need to reshape the galaxy." Will's pulse quickened as he realized the truth in her words. She wasn't just seeking power for her people. She was seeking power for herself, to bend the universe to her will. His eyes narrowed, and he took a step forward, his voice firm despite the unease gnawing at him. "And what about humanity? What role do we play in all of this?" The queen didn't look at him, her focus still fixed on the artifact, but her voice was laced with a coldness that sent a shiver down Will's spine. You are a means to an end, she replied, her words calculated and devoid of emotion. I've always known that humans have something we lack. The resilience, the drive to survive no matter the odds. I need that strength. I need you to be the catalyst. Will's heart sank as the weight of her words hit him. He wasn't just a pawn in this game. He was the trigger. The Queen had manipulated him from the start, using his will to survive to fuel her quest for power. He had been nothing more than a tool for her own selfish ambitions. The pedestal began to hum louder, the symbols now blindingly bright as the energy reached its peak. Will could feel the intensity of it pressing in on him, the raw power filling the room, suffocating him with its presence. The Queen's voice cut through the storm of energy, her words barely a whisper, yet they carried the weight of everything that had led to this moment. This is the beginning, she said, her eyes now turning to him, her gaze piercing through him. The galaxy will bow to me, and you will be the one who made it possible. Will's stomach churned as he realized the full extent of the Queen's plan. She wasn't interested in alliances, in diplomacy, or even in the survival of her people. This was all about her. It had always been about her. And he had been a part of her twisted scheme, helping her unlock this unimaginable power. The pedestal's energy grew even more intense, and for a moment, Will thought the room would explode with the force of it. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the hum died down, the light from the pedestal dimming as the energy was absorbed. Will stood there, stunned, his breath heavy in his chest. The Queen slowly pulled her hand away from the pedestal, her expression unreadable. It's done, she said quietly, her voice full of a strange satisfaction. The power is mine. Will stood in silence, the reality of what had just happened settling over him like a heavy cloak. The Queen had succeeded. She had unlocked the artifact's power, and now she would use it to reshape the galaxy. He had no idea what her next move would be, but one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. What happens now? Will asked, his voice hoarse, the weight of the situation pressing on him. The Queen turned to him, her eyes flashing with cold resolve. Now, we take what is ours, she replied, her tone filled with certainty. And you, human, will help me do it. Will's heart raced, but he knew that he had no choice now. He had crossed a line. There was no going back. The Queen had what she wanted, and he was bound to her by the choices he had made. The galaxy would never be the same, and neither would he. The Queen's words echoed in Will's mind, her cold, unyielding tone ringing in his ears. Now, we take what is ours, she had said, and he knew there was no way out of this now. The artifact had been activated, its immense power now flowing through her, and there was no telling what kind of chaos she would unleash on the galaxy. He had helped her bring this about, and now he was bound to her, whether he wanted to be or not. They stood in the silent chamber, the only sound the low hum of the energy around them, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Will's heart raced as the Queen turned to him, her golden eyes gleaming with cold determination. You're mine now, she said, her voice softer than before, but no less threatening. You'll help me bring this power to every corner of the galaxy. You'll see what we can do with it. Together, we will shape the future. Will swallowed hard, his mind reeling. He had no choice but to follow her, no choice but to be her instrument in this twisted plan. He had been nothing more than a pawn from the beginning, and now he was a part of something much larger, something much darker than he could have ever imagined. The Queen turned away, walking toward the far end of the chamber, where a large, translucent screen flickered to life, displaying a map of the galaxy. She stood before it, her fingers tracing the glowing lines of hyperspace routes and star systems. Will took a hesitant step forward, his curiosity piqued despite the storm of emotions within him. He couldn't help it. He needed to know what her next move was, needed to understand the scope of the power she now possessed. What will you do with all of this? He asked, his voice a mixture of fear and defiance. The Queen didn't look at him, her focus still fixed on the map. We will conquer, she said simply, her voice full of quiet confidence. We will take control of the key systems, the ones that will give us the resources and the influence we need. Then, we will crush anyone who dares to oppose us. Will felt a chill run down his spine. The Queen had never been interested in diplomacy or negotiation. She wanted domination, plain and simple. And he, unwilling participant that he was, was now a part of her plan to reshape the galaxy. He glanced at the pedestal one last time, the glowing relic now dimming, its power seemingly flowing into the queen. "How long do we have?" Will asked, his voice almost a whisper. The queen turned to face him, her gaze locking onto his, her eyes glowing with the same golden intensity that had filled the room moments earlier. "We have as long as it takes," she said, her tone unwavering. "We have the power now, and we will not stop until the galaxy belongs to us." Will's stomach churned as he processed her words. There was no turning back now. He had crossed a line, and there would be no redemption for him. The queen would use him, just as she had used the artifact, and when she was done, he would be nothing more than a tool she discarded. But a part of him couldn't help but wonder, was it possible that this was his only chance to survive? Was there a way to turn the tide, to use the queen's own power against her? The thoughts swirled in his mind, but he quickly pushed them aside. For now, he had to play along, had to keep her trust, or else risk being discarded far sooner than he was ready for. The queen stepped forward, her hand raised as she activated another control panel, this one displaying a list of planets under the queen's control. Will watched in silence, his thoughts racing, as the queen's empire began to take shape on the screen before him. The future was unfolding before him, and it was one he had no part in shaping. "Prepare yourself," the queen said, turning to him at last. "We leave for the first system tomorrow. You will be by my side as we begin our conquest. You will be my right hand, human, and you will follow my lead." Will felt a strange mixture of dread and determination. There was no escape now, but that didn't mean he couldn't make a plan, couldn't find a way to survive, even in the heart of her empire. He nodded slowly, his mind already formulating a strategy. "Understood," he said quietly, his voice betraying nothing of the turmoil inside. The queen gave him a sharp nod, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she turned back to the map. Will knew that the moment of reckoning was fast approaching, and whatever happened next, he had to be ready. The queen would not be merciful, and he would need every ounce of strength he had to survive in her shadow. The future of the galaxy was now in her hands, and Will was tied to it, whether he liked it or not. The following day, Will stood at the edge of the queen's warship, staring out at the stars. The vastness of space stretched before him, a never-ending expanse of black, dotted with distant points of light. He had no illusions anymore. He wasn't just a survivor now. He was an accomplice, bound to the queen's mission, whether he liked it or not. The hum of the ship's engines vibrated through the floor beneath him as the crew prepared for departure. The queen stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the view ahead, the dark, cold beauty of the cosmos reflected in her eyes. "It begins now," she said, her voice as cold and unwavering as ever. Will turned to her, his mind still racing with the possibilities of what was to come. He had no choice but to follow her, to see this through, even if every part of him screamed to resist. "What happens when we reach the first system?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. The queen's lips curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "We take control," she said simply. "The power is ours now, and with it, we will reshape everything." The ship's engines roared to life, and Will could feel the force of the hyperspace jump as the stars around them blurred into streaks of light. The queen was right. This was just the beginning. They were heading into the heart of the galaxy, and nothing would be the same again. As the ship hurtled through the vastness of space, Will's thoughts turned inward. The queen's plan was clear, but what was his role in it? He was her right hand now, bound to her by the choices he had made. He had no illusions about her intentions. She wanted domination, control over the galaxy. But somewhere, deep down, Will wondered if there was a chance for him to change the course of this. He had seen the way the queen looked at him, not just as a tool, but as something more. She had acknowledged his strength, his resilience. But was that enough to keep him from becoming just another pawn in her game? The ship's systems beeped as they approached their destination, and the queen turned to him, her eyes narrowing as if sensing his thoughts. "You're thinking about your next move?" she said, her voice low and almost amused. Will didn't respond, but he could feel the weight of her gaze upon him. She was always watching, always calculating. "Remember," she continued, her voice sharp, "you are mine now, and everything you do will be for the Empire." Will felt the familiar knot of unease tighten in his stomach, but he pushed it aside. He couldn't afford to show weakness. Not now. The Queen needed him, and that meant he had to play his part, no matter the cost. As the ship entered the atmosphere of the first planet, the tension in the air became palpable. Will could see the city lights below, flickering in the distance, as the ship began its descent toward the surface. This was it, the first step in the Queen's conquest of the galaxy. There would be no turning back after this. The ship landed with a soft thud, the doors hissing open as the Queen stepped forward, her posture regal and unyielding. Will followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. They were greeted by a group of alien officials, their faces wary but respectful. The Queen didn't speak at first, simply nodding her head in acknowledgement. But Will could sense the power in the air, the weight of her presence, and he knew that the galaxy would soon feel the full force of her ambition. I trust you know why we're here, the Queen finally said, her voice carrying through the crowd. It's time to take what is ours. The officials nodded, and Will watched as the Queen's plan began to unfold before him. This was just the beginning, but the path ahead was clear: power, control, and conquest. As the Queen moved forward, Will found himself caught in the whirlwind of her ambition. He was no longer just a survivor. He was part of her vision, part of her empire. And though a part of him still resisted, he knew there was no way out. The galaxy was changing, and he was at the heart of it all. The future had been rewritten, and it was up to him to decide whether he would continue to play his part or find a way to make his own destiny. But for now, he followed her, as the Queen's conquest began, and the galaxy trembled under the weight of her ambition.